Story 1. I really thought loving someone was enough. It turns out you cannot love someone enough to make them good for you. Story 2. Bad things happen to bad people and good things happen to good people. So much of life is luck. I no longer judge people based on their circumstances. Story 3. I used to believe that a college degree proved some measure of intelligence. Then I worked for a training center at a language school where the only qualifications necessary were a native level of English and a bachelor's degree. My God, some people are dumb. I also realized I could have gotten into a much better college, although I probably could not have afforded it. Story 4. That which I put in the recycle bin actually got recycled, and I believe that I was helping the planet by doing so. Story 5. Being honest and empathetic will be recognized and respected. I still think this is a pattern of behavior to strive for, but it is not always appreciated. People can honestly disagree with each other. Neither side is necessarily bad in many cases, but many people refuse to view such situations as agree to disagree. They feel the need to perceive those they disagree with as enemies and will do what they can to depict them as vile. Things do not always work out, and you have to accept that many people in this life simply do not like the honest you and just will not. Story 6. Not all people are good. No, they are not. Some people are just unpleasant. I am starting to understand older grumpy individuals who have lost all faith in society. Story 7. People would make reasonable and sensible choices based on the greater good if they understood the importance. It took me a long time to realize that it is only about self-interest and greed. Story 8. If you are a good, dependable employee, your company or manager cares about you, values you, and will support you. However, no matter how great you are to me, we are not friends and we are not family. I will give them an honest 8 hours and nothing more before I am done for the day. Story 9. That formal education was not that important. I went to a good school district that provided a good education. My parents also cared a lot about education. My dad worked as a teacher. He was strict with me about my grades. My parents never let me miss school for anything. But I hated the grind of being a student. I looked at the other kids around me who could miss school sometimes, and they seemed to be doing fine. I especially hated it when we learned in class about stuff I already knew from previous grades, because what was the point of coming to school if I already knew what we were covering? I just wanted to go home at that point. Then my first job out of college was working with at-risk teenagers in a high school. Many of them, for some reason, had huge gaps in their education. It really showed. I would try to tutor them and often had to backtrack because I assumed every high schooler would know something, only to realize they were not following. For example, one day some students came in and asked if I would help them cite the sources on their paper because their teacher asked them to. I started to go over this with them, only to soon realize that they did not know what citing a source even meant. They did not understand what their teacher was asking of them. Times like that really made me realize how much I had taken my education for granted. Story 10. That good always comes back to you. After all these years, I have not seen it. Some people ruin others' lives and face no consequences. Meanwhile, others do good, help out, and receive no gratitude in return. Story 11. I will get more comfortable with socializing the more I do it. Turns out I am autistic, and it only ever caused me to experience burnout and shut down. Story 12. I thought when the government abuses its power, people rise up and remind it that government works for the people and not the other way around. We are at a point where almost every government is corrupt at some level, and the cost of living is too much for the entire middle class, yet people do nothing about it. Maybe we will wait another 10 years until it becomes unbearable. Story 13. I used to think that people in government knew what they were doing or were smart enough to work it out in a professional manner. I could never have guessed that a literal moron could become president. Story 14. Cats should be able to roam freely. I wholeheartedly believed this and thought having indoor cats was cruel. It was not until my cat contracted feline immunodeficiency virus, the equivalent of human immunodeficiency virus, that I realized how dangerous it is for cats to roam outside. It is not just diseases. Cats can get hurt by cars, people, other animals, get stuck, or kill wildlife. It is much safer for all animals to keep your cat indoors. Story 15. That success is all about hard work. Turns out that timing, luck, and connections often play a much bigger role than we like to admit. Story 16. The death penalty is a complex issue. I believe that some people deserve to die for their crimes, but the system is not capable of properly assigning the penalty. It cannot overcome racism, emotional reactions from the jury, poverty, and the cost of a decent defense, or bad faith actors in the prosecution and police. It is not an effective deterrent. Some may justify it if it prevented crimes, though I disagree. It has no effect on crime rates. The process only serves to satisfy public bloodlust. Story 17. I thought for a long time that violence was wrong. I now believe it is sometimes necessary and justified. This does not mean I am more violent. Rather, I see events around the world and from history differently now. Story 18. Being an adult is so great. And then I discovered taxes, work, children, lack of time, and responsibilities. I sometimes miss being a well-fed, housed teenager with only friends and school to worry about. Story 19. I once thought that what unites America are values and exceptionalism. I was a naive young immigrant. In reality, America is just a place where I have my belongings and where I am staying. Story 20. It is worth being kind to everyone, even those who are unkind to you. Now I know I should not waste my time on those who are unkind to me. Story 21. If I could live and save on minimum wage, others should be able to as well. I was living completely independently at the time, but I still think back on this and cringe. Even then, I was not talking about single parents. I have always felt very sympathetic to subsidizing things for people who need it. I was thinking of people in similar situations to mine who were not financially responsible or did not have money due to other poor choices. I was meticulously frugal with my money and had no real vices. However, looking back on my early adulthood, roughly ages 18 to 25, I realize I really did not do much. I almost never went out. Frankly, I missed out, and now I understand people who allowed themselves to enjoy life and did not worry about saving for retirement at 18. I grew up poor and had a lot of money anxiety. This was how I dealt with it. At this point in my life, I have more empathy for everyone overall. Not just the traditionally deserving groups like the elderly, disabled, veterans, and single parents. Lazy, drug use, poor financial planning. I no longer care what the reason is. These are all still humans, and nobody chooses to live in poverty. Even if personal choices have an effect, we do not get to pick our personalities. People are all just different. Story 22. I always said, never confuse popularity with success. Meanwhile, popular people have become successful, and successful people have become popular with no other redeemable traits apparent. Story 23. If you run into an unpleasant person in the morning, you ran into an unpleasant person. If you run into unpleasant people all day, you might be the unpleasant person. If you have spent any time in public in the past 5 years, you know this is completely false. Some people genuinely deal with soul-sucking, self-righteous, unpleasant people day in and day out. Story 24. I once loved the United States military and believed it was a noble organization. I am now the moderator of the regret joining community. I even immigrated to Canada and became a citizen because of negative feelings that started about the United States back then. Story 25. The good people will eventually outnumber and outvote the bad people and drive cultural changes in the right direction. Story 26. Looks do not matter. I have been a scruffy long-haired man, I have been a fat man, and I have been fit with a good haircut. I choose the latter every time because it unfortunately makes a massive difference in how people treat you. I will never forget those I discovered who did not care and treated everyone the same. Experiencing it really helped me see through all the nonsense when it comes to first impressions. Story 27. I have to have my own children to help break and stop generational trauma. I have to share my story in a big way to make the pain worth it. The two-party political system is what it presents itself to be. Anyone can help a person heal just by loving without expectation. I believe this to be true now. Love can heal. One moment can be powerful enough to create change. Story 28. I used to believe that individuals should have the right to own as many and any firearms as they desire. However, after getting to know people better, I realized that many can act foolishly and harshly. Story 29. I was raised on the 1980s and 1990s theme that if you work hard, you will have everything you will ever need. The good guy always won in the end, and that karma existed. Living in this timeline has gutted me. Story 30. Congress must be made up of great people meant to do great things. Congress is a group driven by greed, empowered by and sustaining the facade of a two-party system. Story 31. Hello there. There are two things I believed in. First, that I would find a good job and stay there until reaching retirement age. Second, that there is someone for everyone. As an unemployed 62-year-old eligible bachelor, I failed on both fronts. Story 32. I genuinely used to think feminism and anti-racism were just outdated ideas clinging to injustices we no longer need to worry about. Then I actually read some books to try to prove my feminist friend wrong, and I realized I had been wrong the whole time. Story 33. When I was a kid, I was definitely against private welfare programs. Now that I see the majority of the recipients are elderly and single mothers, I support them. Now I am against corporate welfare. Story 34. There is nothing wrong with libertarianism as an idea, only in its implementation. Indiana University was an unbearable teenager. Story 35. You should not go to work or school when you are sick because it is not just a minor issue. First, it is that serious. Second, you are doing everyone a disservice, including yourself and your ability to heal. I needed to learn that it was okay to take care of and prioritize myself. Story 36. I used to be completely against universal healthcare. Now I am a huge supporter of it, to the point that it is my biggest political issue when it comes to state and federal politics. There is a reason every other first world nation except the United States has it, and that reason is corporate greed in the United States. Story 37. People who work at places like McDonald's do not deserve a $15 or a livable wage. That is nonsense. Anyone who works 40 hours should at a bare minimum be able to afford shelter, food, water, heat, and electricity. Story 38. I am mostly reflecting on my political beliefs, but I no longer think communism is the way forward. Story 39. I believed that the United States would be the place where all of mankind learned how to peacefully coexist and even thrive, the great melting pot. Now, after seeing how much of our population cannot accept others simply existing, I no longer believe that. Story 40. That religion is harmful and religious people can be judgmental. However, the loudest religious individuals are not necessarily representative of all believers. Story 41. This is not going to be popular, but transgender people. I used to think, you are born a certain sex. No cross-dressing or operations are going to change that. I saw it as an insult to science to pretend otherwise. Then I was watching Joe Lycett, and he said there is a difference between gender and sex. Gender is how you would like to be perceived, more like a personality trait, and sex is a scientific biological fact. A lot of the time, we say sex when we actually mean gender. That single sentence cut straight through my argument. I can totally support using gender for almost everything if it makes the person feel better. I see it as little more than greeting a French person with bonjour, rather than hello. I still think there are certain times when sex is important, but even those times are mainly extreme edge cases blown out of proportion by the media. Story 42. I used to think that when I got older, I would be vindicated on all the things I fought with my mother over as a teenager. Turns out my mother was right about a lot of things, and I was just a foolish teenager. Story 43. If I work full-time at any job as long as it is not minimum wage, I will be fine to live on my own. It was a slap in the face when I finished college and could not afford rent or find a roommate. Story 44. Eating a kebab that was left out overnight is fine. I used to have diarrhea about every 2 weeks in college and thought that was normal. I could never connect my poor food hygiene to its consequences. Then I went back to my family, where my mother always cooks food thoroughly and puts everything in the refrigerator immediately. After that, I had diarrhea only once every 3 months. I am sure there are others who do not realize the impact of poor food hygiene. Story 45. My family were good people. They just hid it well until someone came along and made it acceptable to be publicly evil. Then I saw all the cracks in the facade. Story 46. I am adopted, so I was pro-life for a very long time because my birth parents were teenagers who chose not to have an abortion, and that is why I am alive. However, I grew up and learned about autonomy and how things go for the vast majority of children who come from unwanted pregnancies. My being the lucky exception is not compelling evidence for banning abortion. Story 47. When I was younger, I disliked government critics and protectors. I thought all they did was complain instead of actively contributing to solutions. I believed the government looked out for the best interests of everyone, and that people were selfish when they complained. Now that I am older, I have realized the government mostly serves the elite. Public criticism is a significant privilege and a necessity for checks and balances. Story 48. Government officials want to help their constituents. However, it is mainly lip service to get reelected, with the occasional good action actually completed. Story 49. People who make poor decisions need assistance to improve their choices. After 9 years of observation, I believe individuals who consistently make poor decisions should be prevented from making decisions that affect others, such as in driving, voting, and healthcare. Story 50. That the world would eventually get better. Humans will find a way to coexist together. I miss that childlike wonder of mine. Really? Story 51. Being completely sober and abstinent from all alcohol and drugs was unequivocally the best option for anyone who had experienced issues. This was what I was taught, and I had no other experiences to suggest otherwise. I am still in abstinence-based recovery, but I am not going to presume that I know what is better for someone else, or tell them even if I think I do. Story 52. I used to think that if you said you were a follower of Jesus and were part of the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, and asexual community, you were essentially a walking, talking oxymoron. I did not think you could be both. But God put good people like Jay in my life, and I had to rethink for myself. Now, I do not see how faith and sexual orientations are at odds with each other. Thank you, Jay. Story 53. Before having children, I thought their outcomes were mostly about how they were raised, nurture more than nature. After raising 4, I have shifted to nature. They are all great, but also amazingly different. Story 54. I used to love the internet and was disappointed that I did not get into it early. That internet is gone, and now I agree that it is an internet of nothing. It makes me sad. Story 55. I used to be a proud hippie and really believed that no political violence was ever justified. I have since changed my mind. Story 56. Sadly, I used to believe that some women were responsible for being assaulted based on their behavior or dress. I believed this despite having been sexually assaulted as a child. College really opened my eyes to many things, this being one of them. I am ashamed that I held those beliefs, but I understand that some of it was influenced by the environment in which I was raised. Story 57. A change in environment and routine or good habits would help me overcome depression and anxiety. I had an awful childhood environment, and while it contributed to my mental health issues, escaping it made things worse before they improved. Nothing had as dramatic an effect as antidepressants, although many things help. I have accepted that ultimately many of my issues are due to the chemicals in my brain. Story 58. Most people are motivated to be good to others, and those who are not that way are often affected by trauma or other adverse events. However, some individuals hold hateful and extremist beliefs and wish to see the world suffer without reason. Story 59. America is a fascist state influenced by corporate propaganda, causing a majority of its citizens to believe their patriotism is morally superior to that of other nations. Story 60. Most people are good and kind. Democrats and liberals are inherently good. I still lean that way, but it turns out that evil people exist everywhere. My family will always look out for me and have my well-being in mind. Everyone has the one. Story 61. Astrology is based on a geocentric universe, which is so astoundingly wrong that it boggles my mind that I believed it for as long as I did. Story 62. that bad people will always face consequences. Now, the truth is that bad people often get off without punishment and have good things happen to them throughout their lives. Story 63. OJ did not do it. I thought there was no way a celebrity like OJ could kill his ex-wife. None. That is not what A-listers do. Man, I was so wrong. Reading the stories of abuse, not just from her family but from other celebrities, made my stomach turn. I have no doubt now that he was guilty. Story 64. You cannot fix a person, no matter how much time, energy, blood, sweat, and tears you pour into trying to help them. They have to want help, and they have to be willing to do the work to heal whatever issues they have. It took me way too long to figure this out, and all I got were months-long depressive episodes and exhaustion. Story 65. The old saying, "I was smacked as a kid and turned out okay," no longer applies. Since I had my baby son, it is completely off the table. Story 66. I used to believe with all my heart that closing the toilet lid would keep aerosolized fecal particles from contaminating my bathroom. Now I believe differently. This paper concludes that closing the toilet lid prior to flushing does not mitigate the risk of contaminating bathroom surfaces, and that disinfection of all restroom surfaces, such as the toilet rim and floors, may be necessary after flushing or after using the toilet brush to reduce virus cross-contamination. Story 67. I grew up in a conservative household with conservative media and conservative friends. I voted Republican in my first presidential election, but now I am progressive and against the Republican Party. There is a whole range of strongly held beliefs involved. For example, I used to support the death penalty because I thought some people did not deserve to live. Now I am firmly against it in all cases. Why? I still believe some people do not deserve to live for their own sake. However, the greatest suffering caused by killing someone is not experienced by the person being executed, but by their loved ones left behind. A person can only die once, but many people can suffer the loss of a loved one. There is probably an innocent person out there who, despite the crimes committed, loves the person sentenced to death. What did that innocent person do to deserve losing a loved one? Why should they have to suffer loss as well? Some argue that a person who truly has no one who loves them can be executed without guilt. I understand that view, but do we really want the government deciding who is sufficiently loved to be spared death? I do not think so. If we did, they would need a department called the Department of Love, which sounds like a dystopian novel idea. Story 68. For a long time, I thought there was no benefit to drinking milk because it was a scheme from the milk lobby, and I was into health foods. Why do we drink milk from another animal? But now I realize milk actually has a lot of nutrition, and whole milk is good for you. Story 69. I used to think that going above and beyond to help the team succeed in a corporate setting was good for the overall health of the team. I now realize the more a select few individuals do this, the more the rest of the team will become complacent and rely on them for everything. Eventually, you end up in a spot where the two top performers become the entire team and burn out. I have seen this play out multiple times. The best way to ensure team health in a corporate environment is to hold each other accountable. Story 70. Being gay is not wrong. In my defense, I was born and raised in a very rural area where the only exposure to gay people was on television and church. Years later, a cousin of mine came out and opened my eyes to the error of my previous way of thinking on the matter. Story 71. I was homophobic because I was insecure about everything. I would not hug my friends, share clothes, or hold hands. My homophobia made me insecure and immature. Now that I have matured, I believe there is no excuse for being homophobic, not even religion. You can tolerate a gay person just as you tolerate people around you who are not religious. I am now much better to my friends and do not get uncomfortable with touch. It is not about being gay. Story 72. Respect the office of President of the United States even if you do not respect the President. I now know it is possible to disrespect both comfortably. Story 73. I used to be extremely in favor of preserving life. I still consider myself in favor of preserving life. But over time, I realized that government-enforced abortion bans were not in favor of preserving life at all, and were actually quite the opposite. The most consistent stances in defense of life are to support the right to choose regarding abortion, oppose the death penalty, and oppose war. It always bothered me how other people who claim to support preserving life ignored those last two. Story 74. I thought the next real war would be a series of nuclear explosions and never considered small drones. Story 75. As a kid, I firmly believed you could not wear a hoodie and shorts at the same time. Nowadays, I do it all the time. Story 76. I used to believe it was important to have a career in a field I liked. When I was 18, I had a moment of clarity that I would like any job where I knew what I was doing and got to solve problems. However, I second-guessed myself and decided I needed to care about my work on a deeper level, which led me to waste a decade on a science career. 18-year-old me was right. I am now in a completely different field, making more money, and have better hours than the scientific academia I was aiming for. Work is work, and it does not have to be your life. Story 77. That Christianity was the one true religion and only Christians would go to heaven. It took years to unpack the far-right evangelical upbringing. I am a more loving and kind person than when I was deeply involved in the Christian religion. Story 78. Fourth grade in the 90s, it was clear that people wanted a clean world and wished to protect beautiful places and diverse creatures. Just look at this place. I could never have imagined the apathy and outright disregard people have for their environment. I am not religious and definitely not Christian, but it really feels like walking around in a beautiful garden and watching people clear it just to take the most scenic walks. The one who changes and takes more wins, and we all accept that and yearn to get to a position where we can do the same. Much of what we create kills and degrades everything in both the practical and aesthetic sense. Understanding the reality and prevalence of that apathy changed what I thought being human meant. Story 79. I support strict gun control and vote for the Democratic Party in every election. I like President Joseph R. Biden Jr. and Vice President Kamala D. Harris. I am a member of the American Civil Liberties Union and the Human Rights Campaign. Story 80. I was deeply involved in an evangelical conservative environment. Anti-lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender, against abortion and foreign aid, and in favor of the death penalty. I studied journalism at a Christian college and gradually focused more on covering politics after graduation. Every day, I saw Republicans doing the opposite of everything they preached, Democrats being the compassionate ones caring for orphans and widows, and conservatives only caring about money. When I mentioned this to family and church friends, I was ostracized and vilified. Acting on the beliefs and morals I had been taught since birth made me hated by those who taught me those morals. Took some time, but eventually, I changed most of my beliefs. Story 81. I really thought that there were decent men out there. Turns out all men are the same, at least the ones from my experience. All want lust, not actual love, even the men close to me, including family. Story 82. I used to have a relatively positive view of suicide. It is your life, and you should be free to choose when enough is enough. Not anymore. Suicide devastates those who are left behind and often leads to them also taking their own lives. All death is hard, but suicide is entirely preventable. Story 83. Before the age of 16, I judged people and celebrities who abuse drugs. Now, when I hear that they do, I do not care or I feel bad for them because I know they have gone through some type of pain and are using drugs to treat it. Story 84. It really is not possible for everyone to succeed if they try. Some people are just not capable of careers or jobs that can provide them with a living wage. Story 85. When I was a child, I thought all adults knew what they were doing with their lives and had it all figured out. Then I became an adult and learned we are all just improvising and hoping for the best. Story 86. If a man was kind and engaging with me, it meant he cared about me as a human being and wanted to know and understand me. It does not turn out that way. Story 87. When I was younger, I thought women would be catty and nasty towards each other if they wore the same outfit to a party, whereas men would say, "Dude, awesome," in the same scenario. Now, I think differently. Story 88. I thought that we were moving towards a more inclusive live and let live society. Now, I was naive. Story 89. I never believed people could be born evil. I always thought a person is 100% the product of their environment. Now I believe in pure evil. Story 90. The belief that all people are inherently good and kind is a battle I still struggle with until I turn on the news. Story 91. Abortion and conservative politics in general. I don't know exactly what happened to me, but I simply no longer agree with what I used to and vice versa. I am very pro-choice and all-around pro-freedom these days. I can't say that about the Republican Party anymore. Story 92. Everyone should receive or require a college education. I used to think that would help enlighten people, foster empathy, and build a better society. No, I would choose the illiterate person who shares his bread over the person who invented a grain that could feed the planet but is hidden behind a paywall because of greed. To speculate for a moment, I believe the Master of Business Administration program specifically is one of the worst things humans have invented. Story 93. I once believed there should be no term limits. Now, I not only believe in term limits for public offices, I believe there should be a limit to how many years any single person should serve during their life. I no longer vote for people if they have spent more than 12 years of their life in elected offices. Story 94. All you have to do is be good and listen. I never saw myself as a bad person because I was quiet and followed the rules. Adults and teachers praised me for it and scoffed at the kids who did their own thing. Now as an adult, those so-called bad kids went off to find their success because they knew how to get what they wanted, while good kids like me are so used to being told what to do that we plateau. Also, being good does not equal being smart. Some teachers go easy on students who behave well. Story 95. Deep down, people as a whole want to get along. However, decades of retail experience and numerous difficult individuals have proven this to be incorrect. Some people are not happy unless they are ruining someone else's life. Story 96. That hard work guarantees success. Even hard work combined with the right direction guarantees success. Now I think success is mostly about luck, honestly. Story 97. Corporate capitalism. It is valueless rent-seeking of earnings stripped from employees who actually create value. It destabilizes society by squeezing it into a narrowing economic elite and a widening, minimized wage subsistent population. This occurs through a vicious cycle of passive wealth, legally empowered to use its resources to continually add to itself at the expense of anything it can outbid. With concentrated wealth, the rich win by monetizing everything. That may be acceptable for yachts, but it is a poor way to meet people's needs. Raising the cost of milk means it will go to rich households as a treat for their cat instead of to poor households for a child's nutrition. Story 98. That my eyesight might be fixed in 5 to 10 years. I was told that about 25 years ago, and it turns out it is always just something they say to get grants for research. Giving false hope to a 16-year-old who was told they are going blind is pretty cruel. It allowed me to live in a fantasy and ignore using a white cane or guide dog because they said they would cure it by the time I needed those. They did not, and now I am scrambling to adapt. Story 99. Justice will always be served eventually. Sadly, I know too many people who have done awful things and have faced little to no consequences, yet are thriving in their lives. Story 100. Younger people are more progressive than older people. Part of this is survivorship bias. Wealthier people tend to be conservative and have the resources to live longer, so people do not actually become more conservative with age. The most recent election had more regressive young male voters than seen in years. Younger women seem to be more progressive, which contributes to the loneliness epidemic because values are not aligned in heteronormative Generation Z relationships. Story 101. I thought having an advocate for drug decriminalization in a position of political power would be good for the country. I expected a president to spend years talking about getting nonviolent drug offenders out of prison and the benefits of using psychedelics in therapy. Then work with Congress to reschedule drugs and empty prisons. Instead, I returned from a 30-minute bike ride to find out the president's closest advisor and biggest donor used a lot of drugs on the campaign trail and was confronted about it, while receiving a metaphorical golden key to the country from the president. Story 102. Murder is never justified. Every social right we currently have required blood to be spilled because those in positions of power would never let go otherwise. Therefore, I cannot continue to believe the opposite. Story 103. I used to believe that the office of the president deserved respect, whether or not you agreed with the person holding the office. Story 104. There is one true God, and we should share this message everywhere, from Christian to deist. Everyone believes what they want. Unless it directly affects me, I do not care. Religious wars and any kind of evangelization, which is spreading the word about your gods regardless of religion, are fundamentally unwise. Story 105. I really thought love would keep your relationship alive. That is absolutely wrong. It needs many aspects to become strong. Story 106. If you work hard, you will succeed. I grew up with the idea that if I put in enough effort or persevered enough, I would be able to accomplish anything. But over time, I learned that while hard work is important, it is not the only factor. Luck, privilege, timing, support systems, and systemic barriers all play significant roles. Sometimes you do accomplish your goal, but not always. Story 107. I believe the majority of people kept track of when you were right and wrong and would honestly weigh your current statements against your previous record. Realizing that most people ignore such things has been both horrifying and somewhat relaxing. Story 108. Regarding your job, if you demonstrate dedication, loyalty, commitment, and initiative, you will be compensated and rewarded accordingly. Story 109. Racism will not disappear as older generations pass away because younger individuals often hold similar beliefs to their grandparents. Story 110. The government should tax churches and religious groups. I never realized that many domestic violence programs and support services come from churches and religious groups. A lot of terrible things have occurred in the name of religion, including covering up serious crimes, which is inexcusable. However, I overlooked much of the good they do. This issue is still highly debated, but at least for me, it has changed my thoughts and perspective. Story 111. Hard work and loyalty will get you somewhere in the workplace. No, the company will just keep adding tasks without a title or pay raise until you burn out and quit. Then they will hire someone off the street for more money. Story 112. Medication is not taking the easy way out or watering down your authentic self. I nearly died multiple times because I wanted to be strong and whole enough on my own to beat depression, anxiety, and the disabilities caused by my neurodivergence. I will advocate for the right medication regimen for every person to my dying breath because you do not have to suffer. You can progress, feel better, and live a full life with the help of medication. It is worth the struggle to breathe free at the end. Please seek help if you need it. Anyone who shames you for it does not deserve to know you. Story 113. My views on invasive animal species have become more complicated and forgiving. I am sensitive and do not want to kill anything anyway, but I am now bothered by people overreacting when someone posts a photo of an Asian ladybird or something, insisting they kill it. For invasive species that currently cannot be controlled or managed enough to reduce their population, it genuinely does not matter if I let one or two of these animals stay in my place over winter. Even if I killed thousands, it still would not affect their population. Fortunately, they do not infest my place, but if they infest yours, feel free to take care of that. I cannot stress enough that this absolutely does not apply to all invasive species, by the way. Story 114. People should be anonymous on the internet. Anonymity removes many social consequences of being hateful to one another, which seems to have affected children who have grown up always having smartphones and social media. It has also, in my opinion, allowed governments and organizations to use bots and other internet manipulation techniques to control and incite people. Obviously, removing anonymity is not simple and has many ramifications. However, in cases where people have the most anonymity, such as driving on the road or using the internet, a small group stops pretending to be decent and behaves like psychopaths. Story 115. Restricting gun access is pointless because people who intend to use guns for illegal purposes will obtain them through illegal means. However, that is mostly not how things work. I probably would have never thought that way if I had not grown up in a conservative household in the United States. Story 116. That drug users and drinkers were just weak. It took things getting worse for quite a while before I realized that sometimes the pain of life, or even physical pain, becomes so intense that you have to find an escape from it. Granted, turning to drugs or alcohol may not be the best choice to alleviate the pain, but now I understand why people do it. In summary, wanting to numb the pain of a tortured existence is not a character flaw. Story 117. That being skinny equals healthy. I starved myself through college trying to maintain a size 2. These days, I focus on strength training and feeling good instead of the number on the scale. It was the best decision I ever made for my mental and physical health. Story 118. Most people are intelligent or at least get smarter as they get older. Turns out, no, most people are not. This does not only apply to politics, but in general, in my career I have met people who are just plain stupid, for lack of a better word. Even educated people can be dumb in one way or another. I dislike the feeling that only I am the smart one, although I obviously am not, but in certain situations it feels like it. Story 119. Happiness does not lie outside of ourselves or in our circumstances. It is an illusion. When you get what you want, what you think will make you happy, it only numbs the actual feeling you are running away from for a while. It may seem like happiness, but eventually, you will be chasing the next thing you think will make you happy. Story 120. Being friends with your ex is not always mature or sophisticated. Sometimes a clean break is the healthiest choice. I learned that the hard way after wasting 2 years trying to force a friendship that made us both miserable. Story 121. I like eggplant. It just needs to be prepared differently. Took me years to admit to myself that I don't like it, and now I can stop trying. Story 122. Just because you were the victim in a relationship does not mean that you do not have to do any soul searching. Bad relationships start because of your patterns, childhood, and emotional intelligence. I noticed that I picked bad partners repeatedly. I was not a bad person, but I had a savior complex. I was a doormat and would endure abuse because I thought it made me stronger. No, it just makes you more of a doormat. The resentment will build and you will explode. The other person will not change. They seldom do. Starts with you. Break the loop and forge yourself, not save someone else. None of the workouts or money grinding will change who you are if your mindset does not follow. It will change what you look like and what you have, but not who you are or why you are. You will attract healthier people who are secure like you once you implement it. You will see toxic patterns a mile away, and your standards will be higher. Rightfully so if you have done the work. Story 123. I grew up in a very racist household. I spent ages 6 or 7 to 19 or 20 legitimately believing that European peoples were superior to African peoples and the peoples of the Americas because of how advanced European peoples had been in comparison to those other groups. It was not until I took a world history class in college, high school world history does not cover this well enough, that I learned the reason European peoples were so advanced was largely because of the geographic orientation of the European continent compared to the north-south orientation of the American and African continents. Story 124. I have to admit that in my mid-20s, about 10 years ago, I bought into red pill ideology after a breakup and searching online for how to get my ex back. I blamed my failure on not knowing how to play the game and not having the right words to say in various moments. I ended up hurting others and myself by following the prescribed red pill approach. I vowed that I would rather be authentically myself and alone than try to manipulate women with low self-esteem into being with me. I am still single, but I am happy to say I have been free from red pill ideology for about 7 years. Story 125. Honesty is the best policy. I have watched many honest people be taken advantage of and many dishonest people take advantage. I now know that it is okay to bend the rules a bit and believe that making an informed choice and taking subsequent action is better than just absolute honesty. Story 126. My country Canada is not as great as I thought it was. Now that I am in my 40s and have a lot of life experience as a labor representative, as a husband and father of 2 school-aged children, and as a taxpayer, what I have observed is that the rules are slanted in a way that the rich get richer. Our children's education, through no fault of our teachers, is pathetic, and we are taxed heavily with very little representation that provides what is best for the average Canadian. Also, the criminal justice system is a joke, and drugs have poisoned a lot of people. It pains me to write this since I spend a lot of time volunteering and being a part of municipal government on top of working full-time and being a husband and dad. That is where you see just how polluted it has become, or maybe it always was. Story 127. People are supposed to be productive, contribute, and work. But if they do not, it does not mean they are lazy. No, this is just a gravitational space marble. Story 128. Being selfish is bad, and people will judge you for it. Nobody cares, and if they do, too bad. Live your life how you want. Story 129. That I could trust my government, institutions, and police to protect me, that they had my interests at heart. They do what they do. At best, the police enforce the law. At best, a government keeps its promises. At best, an institution follows its rules. And we all know none are perfect. Some sadly veer wildly from that high ideal. You'll note that none of these ideals concern me or making me happy. They do what they do. This is why it is best to know what one can expect from all of these, rather than blindly trust in their goodness. Story 130. Homeopathic medicine is not supported by scientific evidence, but I became involved with it as a young adult. Story 131. I grew up around racism and misogyny and believed it all until I got older and joined the military. Story 132. We, the United States of America, are the good guys in this world. The country is a democracy run to increase the well-being of all citizens. Story 133. That people care about anything other than their own self-interests and self-comforts. It is a world of me's selling a story of we's, being convinced to do things for a yes and a please. The wealthy and greedy continue to get richer and more powerful because manners matter. Kindness is for suckers, and maintaining the status quo is more important than changing for the better. Story 134. That everyone else is an alien and I am the only human. Like I am part of some kind of television show and they are waiting to see what happens. Turns out I am just ugly, autistic, and everyone else's life is a mess too. But still, I definitely could not prove you are not all aliens. Story 135. The only reason people have certain positions is that they know what they are doing. Clearly, it is the opposite. Story 136. Deep down, everybody is a sucker for the truth, no matter how outrageous or unlikely that truth might be. Story 137. Capital punishment, also known as the death penalty. I was in favor. Nowadays, the United States prison system needs an extreme overhaul, as does the entire judicial system. And no on the death penalty. Story 138. Everything happens for a reason. I mean, yeah, but it shouldn't be used to justify the bad things that happen. Story 139. I used to firmly believe that if you just work hard and be a good person, life will work out. You will get the job, the relationship, the happiness, all of it. Now I think that is only part of the truth. Life does not reward you for effort alone. You have to advocate for yourself, set boundaries, take risks, and sometimes walk away from things that are not working. Being kind is important, but being strategic is just as essential. Story 140. I was a neoconservative in the early 2000s despite being a more left-leaning Democrat beforehand. The September 11th attacks and being a member of Generation X affected me deeply, and it took some effort to change my views. Now I wear an anti-fascist bracelet and am to the left of every significant American politician. Story 141. Christian fundamentalism. There are many beliefs related to this, and I have changed my views completely. Thank goodness. Most of these beliefs involve judgment against others. Story 142. The belief in loving the Virgin Mary is incorrect. I believe Jesus is the only way, and that loving the Virgin Mary is idolatry. Story 143. I used to be a diehard believer in tearing down social norms and conventions on gender, but now I understand those are fundamental to life and society. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.